Welcome back, Internet. I moved. But before I moved, I went thrifting, and I bought this. The Pentax SVO IQ Zoom 120 MI. That's such a horrendous name, but don't worry, it's probably the worst thing about this camera. Since I got it, I put a couple of rolls through it, and I have some thoughts, so let's get into it. I'd recommend looking up a manual to get a really in-depth look at how this camera works, but I will go over the main features and some things that I seem to like and dislike about it. It is made out of metal, which is neat, and it's extremely compact as far as point and shoots are concerned. This is it next to, I guess, a roll of 200 for scale, and it's really good. It fits in one of my back pockets, which is nice. The on-off switch is located right here. It looks like it's in the on position all the time, but you'll just move it to turn it on, and it will automatically slide back. When it's on, you have this little menu here, and there's a lot of options, and most of them I just don't use. To be honest, the only button that I really mess with is this one here and this one here. By default, it's going to be in completely automatic mode, so it will decide whether or not it needs to use a flash. If you'd like to specifically disable or enable the flash, you can press it once for flash enabled, twice for flash disabled, and then you have a couple of other options, including a flash disabled backlit and a flash enabled backlit option. I honestly don't find myself using these too much, really at all, but they are there. Other options include red eye reduction, this feature, which is pretty neat actually. This is how you access the self timer on the camera, and you can either set it to self time or this little icon right here, which is actually for a wireless remote that originally came with this camera that you could use to take like wireless selfies. Mine didn't come with this, but from what I understand, they actually work pretty well, and you can find a remote from like a different Pentax SPO line camera, and they should all work with each other relatively well. Other than that, you have this autofocus button that'll let you select like landscape, spot, and that's it. The other real main feature is that down here on the bottom, you can actually switch between normal and panoramic mode. When you switch to panoramic mode, you're not actually capturing any more data on the film slide. You can see that when you switch to panoramic mode, all that it does is move these two blinders down, so you're actually exposing less of your film. I never use this. I feel like if you really want that 16:9 aspect ratio, just do it after you shoot the thing. You may as well get all of the data in there. And that's a quick and dirty overview. Of course, if you want, it does have this zoom function. It has it. I never use this. I almost exclusively shoot it just as is, although it will go from 38 to 120 millimeter as the 120 MI name would denote, but I usually use this just as is. When you do a half press on there, you'll see that the autofocus light will blink green, which indicates that it's autofocused. And if you have a photo that's going to use the flash, or you enable the flash and do a half press, autofocus, and also the flashlight will appear. One thing I will say about this camera is that the flash is absolutely fucking potent. It is the brightest flash I've ever seen on a point and shoot. One of the things that the manual said is that you have to replace the battery every 5 to 7 rolls, which I thought was ludicrous, but I understand why now. Thankfully, this camera just runs off of a single one of these to CR2. They're, available pretty much everywhere. So pretty easy money there. To load the camera, all you'll do is come over to this side, flick this little guy up, and then as the arrow indicates, twist it. And that will sort of pop open the back of the camera. This camera is kind of actually interesting in that it loads film from the right, and also it loads the film canister right side up, which I haven't really seen in a lot of other point and shoots. So you'll load it in. As you can see, there's a little indicator here that just says film. And so I'll pull the film over in there, clamp it in, press the thing shut, and it will automatically grab it and go to the first roll. The way that this film camera works is that as you shoot, it will unspool a little bit more of the film over here. And then when you finish the roll, it will respool the entire thing back into your canister, which, if you have light leaks, is obviously bad news because it means that your film is going to be exposed to the light potentially. That said, I haven't had any issues. I haven't heard of that being a common problem with this camera. So I wouldn't really be concerned. You also do have a little window here where you can see, obviously what film you're shooting in case you forget, but this camera does have DX coding, so you don't need to worry about that. DX coding just means that when you put the film in, the film canister itself has a code on it that the camera will read, and it'll automatically tell the camera what ISO the film is. And I believe this one will DX code from like 100 ISO up to like 3200. So I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to put something in here that it can't read as long as it's, well, got a DX code on the canister. You do also have the option for a little date imprint, but once again, I don't really use this. All in all, I don't really have any complaints about this camera. The only thing that kind of irks me is that when you set the camera into timer mode, it will stay in timer mode until you take it out again. So when the timer is on and you go to take a photo with the self timer, it won't like go back to its normal shooting mode unless you do that manually. Also, these buttons are extremely small. They're pretty responsive, but I have to get in there with like the corner of my thumbnail in order to press them. So I guess if you had like really abnormally large hands, maybe this isn't the camera for you, but otherwise I don't really have any complaints. The viewfinder is actually pretty roomy, especially for a camera this size, and I've never had any issues there. The autofocus seems pretty good. It hasn't ever missed focus, in my opinion. I also don't really put it in, really tricky situations. So take that with a grain of salt. One area where this camera definitely excels is up close. You can see that here with how well the background is blurred out and how sharp the focus is on these two glasses of dogshit, horrible blue champagne. Another thing that this camera pleasantly surprised me with was the ease with which it handled night photography. I shot this and that other shot from the beginning handheld with no flash, and the way that the camera actually handled it was really impressive. I thought that this was going to be, out of focus and blurry, and I'm actually really happy with how those images turned out. If you're someone who's just getting into film, I think it can be pretty overwhelming trying to figure out what camera to get, and point and shoots are probably the most accessible way to start shooting film just because they automate the entire act of actually taking a photo. There's no need to figure out aperture or shutter speed or anything like that. They do it for you. But even within that, it can be totally overwhelming. I think people might feel like if they don't buy, a Pentax T2 or a Yashica T-Series, or they spend, several $100s or a couple of $1,000s on a point and shoot camera, that they're wasting their money or it's just not worth it. And that's just not the case. And I think that's really where this camera comes in. If you're someone who is just getting into film, or you're someone who wants a compact camera that you can throw in your bag or in your pocket and use to document like nights out with your friends, or just nice moments that you see and treat like a point and shoot, then I think this is like a totally viable option. So I guess the $14.99 question here is it a good camera? Yeah, sure. Why not? Would I pay $200 for it? Absolutely not. But I've seen these going on eBay for anywhere from like $45 to $90, and for 45 or 50 or $60, I think this is a fantastic option for a camera. You do lose out on a little bit of sharpness just because it's got a zoom lens. Prime lenses are just always going to be a little sharper, but I think the question you should ask yourself here is, do you care? It's a point and shoot. When I take photos with this, they end up on Instagram or quarantine in case I ever have a political run, and that's about it. They don't need to be the sharpest things ever, and they're totally passable. The body's made out of metal, which I enjoy. I've already dropped it a couple of times and I haven't had any problems there. It's relatively new as far as film cameras are concerned, and so there isn't a huge worry that the electronics are going to crap out on me. And even if they do, I'm only out $15, and so I'm not really sweating it. So in short, yeah, if you're at the Tillamook Goodwill and you find one of these for $14.99, it's totally worth picking it up. Happy hunting.